Great. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Liz Schaller. I'm the NIMAC manager, and Nicole Gaines is here today too, and we're going to be presenting part two of our two-part webinar series for publishers and vendors. And we are excited to have you here today. We are recording this session, and it will be posted on our website along with the slide deck, so you'll be able to refer back to it. And with that, I'll hand it over to Nicole.
Great. Thanks, Liz. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, everyone, this morning. What we're going to be doing in this session today is really taking a deep dive into the technical side of NIMAS file creation. We've got a lot that we're going to cover, and our goal for you today is that if you are a more experienced conversion vendor or publisher, this is just to kind of highlight some things for you, to give you some reminders. If you're newer, it's going to give you a sense of all of the resources that you need and some of the really important issues to consider as you are working to develop your NIMAS conversion workflows. So without further ado, in terms of what we're going to be covering today, we're going to start off talking about some key resources for creating NIMAS files. I'm going to kind of give a brief introduction and then we'll go into a little further detail about those. We'll also discuss NIMAS metadata, why it's important, and an optional tool that might be beneficial as you're preparing metadata. And then the second part of our presentation is really going to go into some best practices and some hints for you in terms of avoiding some common pitfalls when you're producing NIMAS files. So before we get into it, I do want to note that we have a third session in this current series for publishers, and we invite you to attend. We also invite you to invite any folks at your company who might be working directly with customers. The focus of the third session is going to be NIMAC and NIMAS and how to assist your customers who are looking for accessible formats. So it's going to be, this is the first time we've offered this particular session. It's going to be Tuesday, July 22nd at 2 p.m. And we would welcome your attendance. If you would like more information about that, feel free to reach out. So in terms of preparing NIMAS files, there are really three key resources that you are going to want to be referring to, familiar with, and those are the NIMAS 1.1 specification itself, the DAISY structure guidelines, and the NIMAC metadata guidelines. In terms of the NIMAS specification, it's important to note that NIMAS 1.1, under the legislation that created the NIMAC, it is the only file format that the NIMAC can accept. Technically, it is a subset of DAISY, if you're familiar with DAISY files, if you've ever produced those. And each file set is actually it's a little package of parts that are put together to create different accessible formats. And so what we have is that all of the text from the source book is supplied in an XML file, one single XML file. There's also an OPF that provides the required metadata and a file set manifest. This is really important in terms of the metadata extraction as well as in the file validation process. There's also a PDF that includes only the title page, and/or covers and the copyright page. That is for file identification purposes only, not used in the production of accessible formats. And then finally, all of the images from the source material are provided as separate image files in either JPEG, PNG, or SVG format. So when it comes to the XML portion of the NIMAS file set, there is in the specification a baseline element set that must be used to tag the textbook content. In terms of what is included in that element set, there are document level tags, there are structural tags that provide the different sections of the textbook, as well as some hierarchical tags for organization purposes. There are also table tags, image tags, and then there's a set of block and inline images that would also be familiar to you, for example, if you are familiar with other marked up formats such as HTML. So we're not going to go into a lot of detail in terms of what the different elements are in terms of the way that the text is tagged. However, I would just note that if you skim through these, if you look at these and you think, I don't think I've ever used some of these tags, or I'm not sure what these tags are, that could be kind of an indication that you may not be thoroughly utilizing the baseline element set correctly in your tagging, and that you may want to kind of take a deeper dive into the specification to ensure that you have an understanding, and again, as well as the DAISY structure guidelines in terms of how and when to apply the tags correctly. So again, this is just kind of reiterating that the specification and the DAISY structure guidelines really go hand in hand in terms of ensuring that your content is valid. One of the things that is important to note is that automated validation, it can detect whether you're using tagging that is not valid to the specification. These tags don't exist in the specification. It cannot, however, tell you whether or not you have tagged a list correctly or other content. So the NIMAC may require submission if file review or user feedback identifies tagging errors, even if your file passed automated validation. Another thing that I want to point out is that if you do go and refer to the NIMAS technical specification, it's going to tell you what that baseline element set is. The specification, however, does not go into detail in terms of what attributes may also be required in conjunction with those elements. So again, this is why the DAISY structure guidelines are really important to ensure that you're not only correctly using the element set, but also incorporating any required attributes. One example of this, for example, is that page number tags are required in the baseline element set for any material that has page numbers or page breaks. Uh, However, it's also important to know that the page and ID attributes are also required with regard to the utilization of those tags. So again, specification, DAISY structure guidelines, they're both really essential in terms of marking up that XML correctly. So with that, I'm going to actually hand it off now to Liz. She's going to go into a little more detail about the other components of the NIMAS file set.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, this will be a kind of a quick overview again, and then we'll pause for questions because this is quite a bit of information very quickly. And in the meantime, please don't hesitate to put any questions in the chat that you might have as we're going along. So as Nicole mentioned, the NIMAS file set contains several different components. One of those components is the OPF file. That OPF is the file that includes all of the required metadata that accompanies your NIMAS file. It is the information that gets pulled into the system and the information by which your customers locate the files in the NIMAC. As well as the OPF also includes a manifest of all of the files in the file set. In particular, we want to call out that the manifest does include the list of all of the MathML fallback images. So if you are providing MathML or math markup in your XML files, you must also supply fallback images for all of those math expressions, and those must all be listed in the manifest. The OPF also includes the spine, which references the XML file. The metadata, and Nicole will talk more about metadata later, but the metadata requirements and guidance for the NIMAC are provided in a document that we put together that's available on our website. I will note our website is getting a refresh, and in the next couple weeks, it'll be a little bit different, and we will have our metadata guidelines in HTML, and we'll send out an email about that when it's available. But for now, you can still access the current version in this document here, but we will have a nice fancy HTML version here shortly. So another component that Nicole referenced that's part of the NIMAS file set is the PDF. It's important to note the PDF is not a PDF of the content of the material. The PDF is exclusively utilized for file review and cataloging purposes, and it includes just the title page, copyright page, and possibly the covers of the material. There is information that's required to be present in the NIMAS PDF, and this kind of helps determine whether or not you supply the covers as part of that PDF. We do need to see the complete title, the ISBNs, the publisher imprint, and the copyright statement for the material. So, in particular, if the complete title isn't present elsewhere, we do often require the covers to be included in the PDF as well. And this file is also very important for your customers who are downloading a NIMAS file to be able to look at quickly and ascertain whether or not this is the file that matches the book that they have in hand when they're getting ready to produce an accessible format. I will note that we are seeing more NIMAS for digital instructional materials or OERs or other materials that don't have these traditional publication pages in them. And in instances where that is the case, we do ask that the vendor create a very simple PDF that becomes part of the NIMAS file set and includes the required metadata. We have a guidance document about that, but if you have any questions at all as you're putting together that PDF, please don't hesitate to reach out about that. Again, the PDF is not part of the production process for accessible format production. So we do encourage you to not supply production quality files that have large file sizes in the NIMAS file set. It tends to add time to processing and downloading, and it really doesn't add any value to users. So we recommend that the PDFs for NIMAS should just be a few megabytes in size. And we do encourage you to kind of resave PDFs as smaller files for the NIMAS package because we just don't need those large production quality files for the NIMAS file set. The next thing I want to touch on are image files, which are incredibly important. And they're something that we have been looking at more closely over the last year. So we wanted to include some kind of helpful hints for you all as you're working with your images in your NIMAS files. The specification does require that all of the images that are present in the source book be supplied as separate image files in the images folder in your file set. We can accept SVG, PNG, or JPEG formats, and we do sometimes see that there are multiple image file formats within one file set, and that is fine. Images that are supplied with NIMAS must be 300 dpi at their original size and resolution. So it's important that you don't resave files that are kind of lower quality or lower resolution as 300 dpi. We do see this from time to time. There's to be at their original size and resolution. I also will note just a best practice here that the best practice and optimal usability for NIMAS is when the image file naming convention references the print page number where the image appears. The exception of that, of course, for images that appear throughout the book, those are often just named what they are. But for images that just appear once in a book, we have some examples here on the screen of how best to name them. And this is just helpful, particularly for Braille and tactile graphic production, for folks to kind of quickly locate the images that they need for a particular page and a particular graphic. So it's not a requirement, it's just a best practice, but we do appreciate it when we see it. Again, it is essential that the images in NIMAS files be high resolution and high quality because they are utilized for large print production. So it's very important for publishers to provide high quality PDFs or other source files to conversion vendors in order to extract those high resolution, high quality images for the NIMAS file set. Again, we discourage resaving low resolution images as 300 dpi because that does result in blurry images that aren't usable for producing accessible formats, particularly large print. The other thing I wanted to touch on today was text and images. This is something that we've been providing more feedback on recently. We had a kind of an uptick in feedback from our users utilizing NIMAS about this particular issue. So that's why we're taking a closer look at it. In general, text should not be supplied as image files for NIMAS, and it's definitely not acceptable to supply whole pages as image files either. We don't see that too terribly often, but that is not acceptable for NIMAS. If text is provided as an image in the print book, it should be extracted from the image and provided in the XML for the NIMAS file. Text that is integral to an image should ideally be captured as alt text or in a production note or prod note. And if you do have any questions about this as you're working with a particular file, we're always happy to help. I have a few examples on the next several slides just to illustrate this. So these are all examples from recently submitted NIMAS files. This first one shows an example of alt text for an image of a triangle that has a corner and a side labeled. And you can see on the right side of the screen, it highlighted the alt text that was provided by the publisher. A triangle has an arrow pointing to the top, which marks corner, and an arrow pointing to the base, which marks side. This next example is an image where the label is not needed. And that is partly due to the fact that the label itself would not be complete information for a user. It would not be useful without further explanation of the image. And as Nicole will touch on later, alt text is not required for NIMAS at this time. It's encouraged but not required. So we can't require image descriptions, and therefore text that is not helpful without a description is not required. So this is an example of that. This third example is an image that is complex and that heavily relies on text. And this is an instance where the labels should be provided in a prod note, and they were by the vendor here and done well. So this is a flow chart talking about making a claim and how you can compile evidence to support your reasoning for that claim. And all of the labels in this image, including the write-on lines, are included in the prod note. So this is a great example of a time when the label should be included in a prod note. And again, for those who wish to go beyond kind of the baseline requirements for NIMAS, some further options include providing MathML tagging as referenced earlier, and we'll talk about that further down the line in the presentation as well. Supplying alt text for images and longer image descriptions as kind of an above and beyond, and then also using the full DAISY element set in the XML tagging. We do want to note that not all software that converts NIMAS can recognize the full DAISY element set, so it may not always be a beneficial choice. And if you are considering expanding the element set that you use for NIMAS and you have any questions about that, please don't hesitate to reach out. I also wanted to touch quickly on this because in 2023 and 2024, we conducted kind of some intensive outreach around the NIMAS specification, which is part of IDEA 2004 regulations. And we wanted to get stakeholder input on some possible changes to the specification. So if you're someone who attended our convening or participated in our surveys or focus groups, we really appreciate your input on that. We did compile all of that input late last year and submitted our recommendations to the Department of Education, and we will keep you updated as these discussions move forward. Now I'll quickly shift gears here and talk a little bit more about the DAISY structure guidelines and what you'll find in them. This is something that Nicole referenced earlier. So in addition to using the prescribed tags, it is also required that the tagging of content for NIMAS be done in accordance with the DAISY structure guidelines. Following the guidelines helps ensure that your files are tagged correctly and that they will be usable in producing accessible formats. As Nicole said earlier, automated validation cannot evaluate adherence to the structure guidelines. A lot of these things are things that we take a look at as part of our manual review process. There are kind of two ways that you can utilize the DAISY structure guidelines. You can either work from the major structural elements or from the index of elements. The major structural elements include the levels, the syntax, the divisions, as well as those kind of key segments of the book itself, the front matter, body matter, and end matter. There's also an alphabetical index of elements. That's something that we use practically every day in the NIMAC. It's incredibly helpful. And it can be used to locate all of the elements and attributes that are included in the DAISY specification. In the next couple slides, I'll show you some screenshots, but for each element, the index entry includes the definition of that element, the syntax that you should expect for that element, as well as some examples. So here you'll see an example of a sidebar. And at the top, you'll see the definition of what a sidebar is, an explanation for the tagging. And then below that, you'll see the syntax or how that tag should be utilized and nested within the NIMAS file. And then following that, there'll be some examples. I will say the examples sometimes may not cover the particular situation that you're in or the particular question you might have. Some of them are a little more simplistic. So again, if you're not finding the answer to your question here, just reach out to us. We're happy to look into it for you, test, investigate, and get back to you about it. Uh, because the automated validation can't detect errors in applying the structure guidelines, these are things that we look at as part of the manual file review. And if we do spot issues with, list or table tagging, things of that nature, pagination tagging, we will require the vendor to correct those before we certify the file. If you do have any questions about feedback we provide on an issue, or you're not finding the answer that you're looking for in the structure guidelines, again, we're more than happy to help. And with that, I think we'll pause. That was quite a bit of information. Does anyone have any questions?
And while we're waiting to see if there are any questions, one of the things I'll just throw out there is that if there's any part of what we've covered so far or what we cover through the remainder of this session, and you are interested in taking a deeper dive, or it's something that you feel like, I'd really benefit from a little more training or a little more information, we would love to hear about that. We do have a very brief survey at the end, and that is really helpful for us to get your feedback in terms of what's helpful and what you're interested in. And so we just really encourage you to let us know if there's anything that you'd like to see us dedicate more time to in the future, or provide additional resources. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and switch gears here and talk a little bit about NIMAS metadata. So you've referred to your DAISY structure guidelines, you've correctly applied the tagging and created your images, and your NIMAS file set is beautiful. So the last thing that you're really going to want to focus on before you're ready to submit those files is the NIMAC metadata requirements. And so all NIMAS files must include required metadata, and this is supplied in the OPF of the file set. The metadata review is an important part of the file certification process, and the NIMAC metadata guidelines provide detailed instructions for meeting those requirements. And as Liz mentioned, we are really excited that it's going to be even easier to refer to those guidelines when we have our refreshed website launched, because it'll be very, very easy to access in terms of having it right there in an HTML format on our website. And we'll be sure to let everybody know when that is available. So why is the metadata so important? Well, the main reason that the metadata is critically important is that it is the way that your customers, your publisher's customers are going to find the materials that you have in the NIMAC. So it's really critically important. The NIMAC system does provide a text search box, and that can be used to search by title or author, series, ISBN. And there are also a range of search filters that can be applied to search results. So as a publisher or a vendor, you actually see these when you log into your own account. You can kind of see what the options are there. It's a flexible and reliable and quick search, but the really important piece is that it's not a Google search that will retrieve similar records or will prompt if there is no match. So the accuracy and completeness of the metadata, they are both really essential to ensure that the materials can be found. Especially with K through 12 materials, this is even heightened because there are so many different editions or state editions or copyright years for very similar materials, either from the same publisher or across publishers. I think if we were to search for Algebra 1, we would probably get a couple of hundred textbooks that are in the NIMAC. And so we really want to ensure that when a particular textbook is needed, that that's the one that the user identifies. One of the things that is really beneficial to publishers and vendors is that when files are uploaded to the system, you don't have to enter the metadata manually to create the system records for your inventory. This actually happens automatically. The system will extract the metadata from your OPF to create the system record, and this happens whether or not you are using the manual upload or the FTP delivery process. So one caveat there, of course, is that if metadata is missing, or is incorrect or formatted incorrectly, this can cause that metadata extraction and the upload to fail. So that's another reason why following the guidelines is important to ensure that you don't encounter delays when you are trying to upload your materials. So when NIMAC reviews files, again, as Liz mentioned earlier, the PDF in the file set is really our authoritative information about the title, the author, the publisher imprint, the copyright year. So we're really looking at that PDF, comparing that against the OPF to make sure that everything matches up. We also have some checks that ensure that the XML also reflects that same information. The XML is for the same book that the PDF is for, and the OPF matches that as well. So in terms of the cataloging rules that we follow, it's standard library cataloging rules. And again, it's basically to ensure that there's consistency and completeness with the metadata. We do recognize that sometimes publishers may use different metadata to internally track items. This doesn't come up as much these days, but it used to be that occasionally we would get NIMAS files and the title would just be kind of like almost a code that was used to internally track inventory. And so it's totally fine whatever publishers use internally, but we will consider that the print book itself is going to be the authoritative source for the NIMAS metadata. When it comes to certifying files, I will say that the NIMAC routinely makes minor metadata corrections at the point of file review so that files can be certified. This is something that is routinely done, and it's very valuable both to the NIMAC and to publishers because it means that we don't encounter delays in certifying those materials. We can just go ahead and make those corrections. Another thing that is beneficial is that when corrections are made at that time, they are saved not only to the system record, but also to the OPF. So that correction is carried with the file when that file is later downloaded by users. So it's in both places. We do kind of let folks know that if there are extensive errors in a file or if there are errors that affect a large number of files, we are a very small team. And so, and we tend to have a pretty high workload. So it may be necessary that we would have to go back to the vendor and say, these 50 files all have these 4 problems, and so we do need you to correct these and resubmit them just because of our bandwidth in terms of making those corrections on your behalf. So again, we just do advise that if you are newer to the NIMAC, or if you just have questions about how to include the metadata or a specific metadata element, please refer to the guidelines. And on the publisher side, we would just ask that even if you are not directly involved in creating the NIMAS files, to just be familiar with the metadata guidelines. We're not going to go into detail on how those are structured, but I will note that at the beginning of the guidelines, there's kind of a little summary section that just really quickly goes through, these are the required metadata, this is optional, and just to kind of let you know, because as a publisher, what's really important is that you know what your vendors will need in order to correctly prepare the NIMAS OPF. And again, we're always happy to assist if there are any questions. One of the things that we do welcome, and we especially encourage if you're working on a new curriculum, a new program, is that if you have queries that you would like to send us, you'd like to get some feedback on whether you're on the right track with metadata, we are always happy to take a look at your OPF and the PDF and give any sorts of suggestions or make any tweaks, especially again, if you have a new program. We've actually in the past had situations where a vendor's working on a new curriculum. Maybe they're going to have 300 or 400 files, but every component, there are 6 different types of components, and they're all going to be consistently formatted. And so they will send us an example of each of those 6 components. We'll take a look, and then it's just much easier for us to provide feedback or corrections at that point, rather than after those 300 or 400 files have been finalized and submitted. And if there are issues, then that's just it's just much more work to make corrections at that point. So if you have any interest in that, please feel free to email us, nimac@aph.org. We're just always happy to provide assistance with files. And it doesn't have to be a 300 or 400 either. We're happy to even take a look at a one-off if it's something that's very unusual and you're just not sure what to do with the metadata. So the last thing that I'm going to talk about before handing it back and before we shift to talk about best practices and some final hints is the Excel to OPF tool. If you are a publisher or a vendor, you may have noticed that this is something that exists in the system. It is an optional tool. You are not required to use it, but it can be useful. If you are interested in having this automated way to correctly format and tag your metadata. So basically the way that this works is that there is a metadata template, there is an Excel template, and you basically fill in one line for each of the OPFs that you would like to create. You upload that to the system and it generates the metadata, and it automatically and immediately emails you a little zip file that has what we call starter OPFs for each of the lines in the spreadsheet that you uploaded. So it's very simple. It's really straightforward. I would note that the metadata template itself, the Excel sheet that you should use, is found on the Resources tab in your NIMAC account. So that is also always available to you. And if you've never played around with it, you might want to just play around with it and just see what you think of it. It's just, you're not committed to using the OPFs if you're like, yeah, this, well, I've got a really good thing going on and I don't need this tool. But just encourage you to take a look if you haven't taken a look at it in the past. We did update the NIMAC metadata template in 2024. There were a couple of required metadata elements that we were able to make some changes to. So we encourage you to use only the most updated template if you do decide to give it a whirl. If you do decide to give it a try, what you will find is that, again, those starter OPFs that you are emailed by the system will have all of the metadata correctly tagged and formatted, but you will still need to add the manifest and the spine portions of the OPF. But once you've done that, the files will be ready to use in your NIMAS faucet. And again, as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. So before we move on to best practices and kind of jumping into some specific tagging issues, are there any questions about metadata? Okay, well, I'm not seeing anything come up in the chat. So at this point, I'm going to hand it back off to Liz, and she's going to take a deeper dive into some of the specific tagging challenges that we sometimes run into with NIMAS files.
All right, thanks, Nicole. We are going to go through these pretty quickly, but again, you'll be able to reference this slide deck. It will be posted on our website. So we wanted to make sure all the content was there for you to look back at, but I will move through this section relatively quickly. The first thing that we're going to take a look at is list tagging. Lists are an incredibly common component of almost all NIMAS file sets. And I will note that the type attribute is not required for lists that include no numbering or bullets. So the table of contents or the index, those big structural elements don't require the type attribute. But for other lists, the type attribute is required. And there are three options. There are unordered lists or UL type lists, ordered or OL type lists, or preformatted or PL type lists. The unordered list type should generate a bulleted list in the accessible format production process. So this is the list type you would use for just a basic bulleted list. The ordered list type should, emphasis should, generate a numbered list in the accessible format. Now, what we know after doing some extensive testing in various conversion softwares is that this list type is not recognized by most conversion softwares. And so the numbering in the lists ends up being missing. So what we're now encouraging vendors to do is instead of using the ordered list for numerical lists, we are encouraging the use of the pre-formatted list type, which is the third list type. And this is the one where no numbering or bullets are automatically supplied by conversion software. Instead, they're provided inside the list item tags. And I'll show you that on the next slide. But again, even though ordered lists are technically acceptable for NIMAS, we are highly encouraging folks to use instead the pre-formatted list type because of the conversion software limitations. So you can see an example here of what we're talking about with using that pre-formatted list type instead to include the numbering within the list item tags itself. I'll note glossaries are they're a special kind of unordered list, and they have their own tags, and I'll talk about that here in a sec. We also encourage you to not utilize paragraph tags inside of list item tags. These are, they're just not needed, and they can sometimes cause issues, particularly with Braille software conversions. So we encourage you to just leave them out. They're not needed. If there are multiple elements within your list item tag, you can use the list item component tags if you wish. So here is kind of two different ways that you could format an index or TOC entry that has a term and a page number, a reference number. You can either include both of those items within a list item tag, just separated by a comma, or you can use list item component tags to separate the term from the page number. If you do that, please do put a space between the two list item components so that that converts correctly in software. From the DAISY structure guidelines, there is a recommendation that if you have more than two list item components within a list item tag, that you instead consider tagging the content as a table, because that is more complex content. Using internal links for indexes and table of contents is optional, but it is highly encouraged for NIMAS because it is extremely valuable when NIMAS is used to generate digital formats like EPUB and HTML, as well as the new digital eBraille specification as well. And the way this looks, you can do this either with or without the list item component tags, is utilizing the href tag to wrap that page number. So again, you can just do this within a list item tag, or you can do this within a list item component tag. And like I mentioned previously, glossaries have their own special list tagging that starts with the definition list or DL tag in conjunction with the DT, which is for the, the glossary term, and the DD for the glossary definition. Those are the three tags. And one reminder, because we do see this from time to time, the DL definition list tag is intended to enclose the full list, not individual glossary entries. So you can see this is a sample snip from the DAISY structure guidelines showing how that DL tag wraps around the whole list, in this case, the alphabetical division of the list, with the terms and definitions nested within it. Like I mentioned, if there are two or more components to each list item, it might be more appropriate to mark up the list as a table. One example of this that we see pretty commonly are multilingual glossaries. Those are often more appropriately tagged as a table rather than as a list. And if you do have some sort of structural element like this and you're having a tough time making that decision, or you have some questions about that, don't hesitate to reach out. When it comes to tables, these are another incredibly common thing in textbooks and consumables as well. Tables are marked up using the table element in combination with a caption tag, if that's applicable. The column heading row that's nested in the T head tag, then the T body that captures the body of the table. You have your table rows and then your table column headings and table data cells. So quite a few tags that comprise tables. And similarly to other types of images and text, tables should be tagged as text in the XML. Please do not provide tables as images. You may feel that that's the right thing to do because it seems to best capture the formatting and layout of the book, but that is not the purpose of the NIMAS XML file. The NIMAS XML file is intended to capture the content of the book. So it's very important that the text is tagged as a table. Tables in instructional materials for K through 12 might be simple or they might be complex. Some may or may not include a caption or footer, but tables will commonly include column headings. And it's incredibly important to utilize the correct heading tags for these because this is how we ensure that the navigation in digital formats that are produced from NIMAS like DAISY or EPUB, that they're able to be navigated correctly. So you can see here an example on the left of a table formatting, and then on the right, you can see how that is tagged in the XML file. Another really important element that we find in every single NIMAS file are page numbers or pagination. Page num tags are required for all NIMAS files, and the page attribute should be present on all page num tags. There are three attributes that you can use with the page num tag. Page front is for Roman numerals that are found in the front matter. Normal is for integer only pagination. It's kind of your standard numerical pagination. And then special is for any other content, including empty tags. So here you can see how to handle unnumbered pages. This can be a little complicated. There are a few different instances here, so we wanted to make sure to touch on it. If the printed book has no pagination, then page num tags are still required to indicate where there are physical page breaks in the material. When there is no pagination or unnumbered pages are not within a numbered page sequence, then those should be tagged as empty page num tags with the attribute of special. If there are unnumbered pages that are within the sequence of numbered pagination, so say, every other page is numbered and then the others are not, but they remain within the sequence, then those should be numbered as if they showed a number on the physical page. One other thing I want to quickly touch on are write-on lines. Blank lines are extremely common in all consumables and even a lot of textbooks that we see in K through 12. And unfortunately, there is not an XML element in NIMAS for write-on lines. So the best thing that we've found through our testing with software is to utilize underscore characters within span tags to capture these lines. And here are on screen, you can see a couple examples of that. One last thing here. While it is necessary to capture write-in lines in NIMAS, tags should not ordinarily be used to try to reproduce blank space on a page. As I mentioned earlier, NIMAS tagging is semantic. It's not intended to capture the exact physical layout of printed pages. So please do not use p tags, paragraph tags, to create empty space on a page. You can utilize the line break tag if you need to insert line breaks, but that use of that tag should be minimal. Again, we're not trying to capture the actual layout of the book in the NIMAS file. We're trying to capture the content of the book. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Nicole.
Great.
I have a
Thanks, Liz.
question about the lists. So for sorry if I if I missed this and you did cover it. So for something like a multiple choice question, would you use an ordered list? Like if it's like, you know, A, B, C, D, choose from one of those options. Would you use an ordered list or would you use a pre-formatted list?
Yeah, and that's kind of the case where in theory, you should be able to use an ordered list, but it is not well supported in translation software. So that's the example where either a pre-formatted list or an ordered list would be valid, but we strongly recommend a pre-formatted list. And that's especially the case. Sometimes we see really complicated exercises where you'll have numbering that kind of stops and starts and stops and starts. And that kind of numbering and transition, if you're, you know, to kind of get a little more into the weeds, you can actually choose in the daisy tagging what kind of enumeration you're using and what your start digit or start letter is. Those attributes they're just not supported. So we just across the board recommend that if you have any numbering, if you have any lettering in your list, just go ahead and include that in the list items. Use the pre-formatted list, and that's really going to enhance the usability of the file. Does
Okay.
that help?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Thanks for the question. So to kind of wrap things up here, I just want to spend a couple minutes talking about some final best practices with regard to the optional content, the alt text and the MathML. And then I have three final pointers, and then we will be wrapping up. So in terms of alt text, as we mentioned before, it is strongly recommended. It's extremely valuable in the NIMAS file sets, but it is not a requirement at this time of the technical specification. As kind of a quirky thing of the specification, the alt attribute must be present on the image tags, but it does not have to contain content. If you do supply alt text, it can be as short as a short phrase, but generally it should not be longer than 1 to 2 sentences. If you have complex images and you would like to provide a longer description, please use the prod note element. Every now and then we see people use LONGDESC as if long desk was a valid tag for a valid tag or a valid attribute for NIMAS. It isn't. Please put any long descriptions in a prod note. And we do have a short resource on our website related to this if you would like to refer to it for more information. When it comes to good quality alt text, this is something that we find that alt text, it's really runs the gamut in terms of we see really excellent alt text, and then sometimes we find that there's alt text that is not, it's really not usable, and we have to send it back to the vendor. So we always encourage that publisher staff write or at least review alt text that's supplied with NIMAS files. Generally, alt text is going to be really context based. It's going to really depend on what the learning objective is, what is the role of the image in the content, and publishing staff are usually in the best position to make that determination. Of course, it also needs to be grammatically correct, age appropriate, and clearly written. So we do not have a mechanism or the bandwidth to do exhaustive review of alt text. However, if it's present, we will spot check it. And if we do find that there are a lot of spelling errors or grammatical mistakes, we will require that it be corrected. Or again, at this point, it's optional. So we may have to just say you have to correct it or remove it from the file because of the usability issue. In terms of MathML, again, this is another feature of NIMAS that is optional, but it's extremely valuable. It's especially valuable for Braille production. Well, it's valuable for a lot of different formats, but it is optional at this time. MathML 3.0 is the current standard. And we do recommend that MathML 3 be used at this time. And some of you folks who are on the more techie side may be keeping an eye on MathML 4. That is in the pipeline. Not sure when that's going to be released. But MathML 2 is still valid, and it still can be supplied. We do encourage MathML 3. We have a brief document, MathML and NIMAS, that's also on our website that includes the information that is going to be included in the following slides. So I'm going to move through them really quickly. The pointer that I want to emphasize right now is just that the declaration that you supply at the top of your XML file will vary depending on which version of MathML you are supplying. And so you just want to basically make sure that the declaration does match up with the version of MathML that you are supplying. And so in the next two slides, we have two sample declarations. These are also supplied in that guidance document if you'd like to go to that document and refer to it. So just want to make a point of that. The other pointer that I want to mention, Liz had mentioned this earlier on in talking about the OPF and the manifest, and that is that, while MathML is extremely valuable, it is not universally supported at this point. And for that reason, it is important to ensure that you have included fallback images for the MathML expressions. So these are referenced in the OPF manifest, and they should be 300 dpi, and those will be referenced on the alt image attribute in that on the math tagging. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out. And then the last thing that I wanted to just mention is actually, the penultimate thing that I want to mention, alt text for MathML. Alt text for MathML, similarly to alt text more generally, is not required. One of the things that is different about alt text for MathML is that because text to speech is better supported now than in the past, as in digital formats, providing alt text for MathML ironically could lead to redundant content for some digital formats. So the best practice at this point is not to include alt text for MathML. Strongly encourage it for all other images in the file set, but for MathML, it is probably not something that you need to do. The alt text attribute is required on the math tags, but it is not required to provide an alt text description. We do ask that if you are not providing alt text, don't include placeholder text such as math or equation in the alt text attribute. That's not useful. Just leave it empty. And so the last thing that I do want to mention about MathML and math expressions that are tagged as regular text. This is an issue that we have seen very commonly, and our best guess is that this has to do with MathML conversion processes being based on what is supplied in the source material as an image versus what is supplied as regular text. We are aware that simple math is very easy to supply as regular text in a file and in source material. However, in order to ensure that the correct Braille codes are used when the NIMAS file is converted, it's really important that all math, even simple math, be tagged as MathML. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out. One of the things that we recently did was we made an enhancement to the NIMAC validation wizard to help vendors identify when simple math has been missed and not tagged as MathML. So we do encourage you, if you have not downloaded the validation wizard, if you don't have the most recent version, to be sure that you download it because it will provide you this additional information if there is math that appears to be tagged incorrectly in a file that contains MathML. So moving on, I know we're coming up to the top of the hour here, and we do want to have a couple minutes at the end for questions. I just have 3 final reminders before you submit your files. The first one, always be sure that you have transcribed the complete title page in the XML. Even though doc title and doc author are included in XML, these are generally ignored by conversion software. So it's really important. We want to be sure that your XML identifies the title and the author and the other essential information found on the title page for your material. The second pointer is to be sure when you've zipped up your file, or no, that's the third one. Number 2, do not include metadata in the XML head tag. Again, metadata for NIMAS is only provided in the OPF. Full DAISY does permit metadata in this element. However, it's not valid for NIMAS. Don't overfunction. Just put your metadata in the OPF. Don't put it in the XML. And then the third thing is, as you're zipping up your file, please check for any extraneous files. This mostly comes up with certain versions of Mac computers. If they are used to compress the file and create the zip archive. Occasionally there are duplicate files or extraneous files, and these can sometimes affect the success of the upload process. So with that, I would just note that we do have a lot of resources on our website. We encourage you to check out our website if you haven't. And again, we will be launching a refreshed website in the next week or two, and would be real interested in your feedback on that. And last but not least, there are still some resources NIMAS related from the National AIM Center website at CAST. So if you are really new and you're interested in some NIMAS exemplars, you can find some of those resources at the CAST website. So with that, we just have a few minutes left, and I'm going to go ahead and ask if Alexa, if you can put our exit survey up. Again, this is really helpful to us in kind of getting a sense of what is useful to you guys, what is helpful, what you'd like to see in the future. So if you could just take a couple of minutes, it's really quick. We would appreciate that. And with that, I think there might have been 1 or 2 questions in the chat. I think there was one question about a character limit for the alt text. As far as we know, this may be something that would vary depending on the conversion software used with the NIMAS file. We have not been, let's just put it this way, we've never been approached by anyone saying they've had an issue with alt text being too long, but kind of as Alexa mentioned, 1 to 2 sentences would basically be your max for that. Thank you for that question. Any other questions? And do feel free to come off of mute if you would like to ask a question rather than putting it in the chat.
Yeah, Nicole, I just have one question. Is there any viewer is available to view the NIMAS XML creator?
Sorry, to view the NIMAS XML creator?
Yes.
What is the NIMAS XML creator?
No. Is there any viewer is available to upload and view the structure of the XML we have created?
Oh, you mean other than looking at it in an actual XML editor?
Yeah.
Yeah, not really. I mean, at this point, because it's a source file format, if you wanted to kind of go back and review it, you would really have to kind of just convert it. I will say if you're kind of interested in seeing, for example, how well it converts to EPUB, the DAISY pipeline is free software that's available that can convert NIMAS into EPUB very quickly. And so if you want to kind of get a sense on the fly of, how well, what does this look like? Is the formatting good? That's a free tool that is available if, if
Okay.
that is helpful to you.
Yeah, we will check on that. Thanks, Nicole.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for your question. Okay, well, we are at the top of the hour. Thanks everyone so much for joining us. We do appreciate your attendance and again appreciate your feedback. And we hope to see you or some of your colleagues at our third session that's coming up. And with that, any last words, Liz?
No, I think we're good. And like I said, I'll send out an email when this recording and the slide deck are posted on our website and available.
All right. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great day or a great evening. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.